Picture a Tuesday morning in suburban Phoenix. A man in his mid-50s is having chest pains. His wife calls 911. Within 8 minutes, an ambulance pulls up. 2 paramedics, oxygen, a defibrillator, a full mobile cardiac unit. The care is fast. It is professional. It may well save his life. 3 weeks later, a bill arrives in the mail. The ride was 11 minutes, 4 miles door to door. The charge is $3,218. And here is the strange part. His insurance pays a portion of it. But the ambulance company that responded is out of network, meaning it has no contract with his insurer. So the insurer covers what it decides is a reasonable rate, let's say $900, and sends that directly to the ambulance provider. The remaining $2,318 comes back to him, personally, as a balance bill. He had no say in which ambulance showed up. He couldn't exactly shop around while clutching his chest, but under current federal law, that bill is perfectly legal. He is not protected. And in 28 states, there is no state law to fill the gap either. This is not a story about a greedy company cutting corners. It is a story about a much stranger thing, a system that was deliberately, architecturally designed to leave one door open. And that door happens to be the one you walk through on the worst day of your life. To understand how American ambulances became one of the most expensive, least regulated, and most financially treacherous parts of the healthcare system, you have to go back to where most American healthcare dysfunction begins: the gap between what a service actually costs, what the government agrees to pay for it, and what happens to everyone caught in between. For most of American history, ambulance services were funded the way fire departments are, as a public good, paid for with tax dollars, operated by municipalities or volunteer corps. The idea was simple. Emergencies are unpredictable. Coverage must be universal, and nobody should have to calculate the cost while bleeding. Through the 1960s and the 1970s, that model mostly held. Ambulances were a civic function, not a business. Then Medicare arrived, and with it, something that would quietly rewire the whole industry. When Congress created Medicare in 1965, it needed a billing code for ambulance transport. So it created one and agreed to reimburse providers a set fee for each ride. Suddenly, there was a revenue stream attached to every 911 call, and revenue streams attract capital. Over the following decades, private companies began moving into emergency medical services, particularly in suburban and rural areas where municipal systems were stretched thin or underfunded. The pitch was seductive. We will handle the ambulances. You do not have to staff them or buy the trucks. By the 1990s, the largest private ambulance operator in the country was a company called American Medical Response, AMR, running thousands of vehicles across dozens of states. By the 2000s, private ambulance operators had become a fixture of the American emergency care landscape, often winning county contracts that previously went to public agencies. In 2017, American Medical Response was acquired by the private equity firm KKR for $2.4 billion. KKR then merged it with another company it owned, Air Medical Group Holdings, under a new umbrella entity called Global Medical Response. Today, GMR reports annual revenues of roughly $5.7 billion, making it the single largest emergency medical transport company in the country, operating ambulances across all 50 states. KKR had recognized something the industry had quietly understood for years. In a market where the buyer has no choice and no time to negotiate, pricing power is nearly unlimited. $5.7 billion from ambulance rides Now here is where the math gets interesting, because that revenue does not come from a simple, stable, efficient market. It comes from an extraordinarily complex patchwork of payers: Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance, and uninsured patients, each paying wildly different amounts for what is, functionally, the same service. Let's work through it. The federal government, through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, sets a fee schedule for ambulance transport. According to the first CMS Ground Ambulance Data Collection Report, released in December 2024, the average Medicare reimbursement across all billing codes is $328.89 per transport. Meanwhile, the average cost for an ambulance agency to actually run that transport, accounting for crew wages, vehicle maintenance, fuel, equipment, dispatch, and overhead, is roughly $2,663. That is a gap of more than $2,300 per ride. Every time Medicare sends an ambulance to pick someone up, the provider loses money on that call. Medicaid is worse. Many state Medicaid programs pay even less than Medicare, sometimes as little as $100 to $150 per transport. Some agencies that serve high Medicaid populations describe these reimbursements as essentially voluntary losses. They take the call because they have to, and they hope the private insurance calls in the same week cover the difference. So how does the math work? How does a company generate $5.7 billion a year and stay solvent? The answer is the charge master. Ambulance companies, like hospitals, maintain an internal list of what they charge, the charge master rate. For a basic advanced life support response in many markets, that rate runs between $1,200 and $3,500 per transport, plus additional charges per mile. According to national data, Americans pay about $19.49 per mile for ambulance services, far higher than any comparable country. For Medicare patients, the company collects $329. For Medicaid patients, perhaps $120. But for privately insured patients who are out of network, the company bills the full charge master rate and then pursues the patient for whatever the insurance company does not cover. The patients with private insurance, the ones who theoretically have the most protection, end up subsidizing the gap created by low government reimbursement. They are the cross-subsidy. They are what makes the math work. And this is where the regulatory story becomes genuinely astonishing. In 2021, Congress passed the No Surprises Act. It was one of the most significant pieces of healthcare consumer protection legislation in years. The law ended surprise billing for emergency room visits. It ended surprise billing for in-network hospitals that used out-of-network specialists. It even extended protections to air ambulances, those helicopter flights that had been generating bills of $20,000, $40,000, even $80,000 for a single transport. Ground ambulances, the ones that handle roughly 35 million transports every year in the United States, were explicitly carved out, not accidentally, not as an oversight, explicitly. Congress created a separate advisory committee, the Ground Ambulance and Patient Billing Advisory Committee, to study the issue and report back with recommendations. That committee published its findings in August 2024, outlining a range of options for federal action. As of today, federal legislation still has not passed. The carve-out remains in place. For patients in 28 states, nothing has changed since the bill was signed. The official reason Congress gave was complexity. Ground ambulances are operated by an unusually diverse range of entities: municipal fire departments, county EMS agencies, hospital systems, non-profits, and private for-profit companies, each operating under different regulatory frameworks, different state laws, different labor agreements. A federal billing cap, the argument went, might inadvertently destroy rural systems that genuinely depend on billing revenue to survive. Federal lawmakers, facing that argument from both industry groups and some state officials, punted. That argument is not entirely wrong, and that is the uncomfortable part of this story. To be clear, the ambulance industry's billing practices do not exist simply because of greed. They exist in significant part because of a structural funding failure that long predates private equity. The United States has never committed to funding EMS the way it funds police and fire services. Unlike a fire department, budgeted as a fixed public cost regardless of how many fires occur, EMS agencies in most jurisdictions are expected to cover their costs through billing revenue. Every transport has to pay for itself. And when Medicare pays $329 for a service that costs $2,663 to deliver, the agency either finds a way to extract the difference from somewhere else or it closes. There are approximately 21,000 EMS agencies in the United States. Many are volunteer organizations running on donations and fundraisers. Hundreds of rural services have shut down in the past decade because they simply cannot make the math work. In some counties in the rural South and Midwest, the nearest ambulance is now 45 minutes away. When private operators like AMR step in, they are often filling a genuine void that no public system was willing to fund. The steelman for the industry goes something like this. We are providing a service that communities need and governments won't pay for. Cap what we can bill, and you eliminate the cross-subsidy that keeps rural services operational. You get equity on the billing side, and you lose coverage on the service side. It is not a crazy argument. It is, in fact, the argument that stalled federal legislation for 3 years. But here is where it gets more complicated, because there is a version of this argument that is legitimate, and then there is what happens when financial engineering is layered on top. Brookings Institution researchers studying air ambulance billing found that helicopter ambulances owned by private equity firms charged an average of $48,250 per transport. Non-private equity carriers averaged $28,800. The private equity carriers were charging 7 times what Medicare would have paid. The non-private equity carriers were at 4 times Medicare. Both numbers are extraordinary, but the gap between them, nearly $20,000 per flight, reveals something important. When profit maximization is layered on top of an already broken reimbursement system, prices do not rise to cover legitimate costs. They rise to extract the maximum the market will bear. And in a medical emergency, the market will bear almost anything, because the patient has no choice and no time. A 2024 Health Affairs study on ground ambulances found that billing and prices differ significantly by ownership structure, with for-profit operators charging substantially more than their non-profit and municipal counterparts, even when controlling for local market conditions. The study found that communities served primarily by private for-profit ambulance companies face meaningfully higher out-of-pocket exposure than those served by public or non-profit providers. The patients who face the sharpest end of this are not the uninsured. Most providers have some charity care policy for the uninsured. The patients most exposed are the ones with insurance who assumed they were covered. According to PIRG, roughly 51% of patients who take an emergency ground ambulance ride face potential surprise billing. The median out-of-pocket balance bill is $450. In some states, the median exceeds $1,000. These are medians, meaning half of patients face more. One documented case from California. A patient received a bill for $7,110 from AMR for a single out-of-network ride. Another patient was charged $8,460 for a hospital-to-hospital transfer, a trip to a facility that could handle a procedure the first hospital could not. He was unconscious for part of the journey. He had no capacity to consent to the cost. Some counties have found a workaround that is, if you squint at it, almost elegantly absurd. They offer an ambulance subscription. Wake County, North Carolina, charges residents $60 per year. Pay the annual fee, and any 911 ambulance transport for any household member, as many times as needed, costs you nothing out of pocket. Wake County EMS has found that the subscription revenue, pooled across tens of thousands of households, generates enough income to cover the gap between Medicare reimbursements and actual operational costs. You are, in effect, prepaying for the statistical likelihood that you will need an ambulance distributed across your neighbors. It is insurance for your insurance. And the fact that a $60 annual fee can solve a problem that federal legislation has not is its own kind of verdict on the system. $60 a year versus a $3,218 bill. That spread is the measure of a system that has never decided what it actually is. What is remarkable is not that the problem exists. Healthcare billing dysfunction in America is well documented, extensively studied, and apparently very difficult to fix. What is perhaps more remarkable is that when Congress had the specific, concrete opportunity to address ground ambulance billing in 2021, when it was literally writing the legislation, it did not. The No Surprises Act that covered hospitals, specialists, and air ambulances left a door open for ground transport. Some experts attribute this to genuine policy complexity. Others note that the American Ambulance Association lobbied actively against federal rate caps, arguing they would destabilize rural services. Both explanations are probably partly true. And the 28 states without protections are not some backwater. They include major population centers where private ambulance operators have significant market presence. State legislatures have been moving faster than Congress. By 2026, 22 states have enacted some form of ground ambulance billing protection. North Dakota caps charges at 250% of the Medicare rate. Washington state passed new protections in 2024. Oregon defers to local government rates. The patchwork is growing, but it means that whether the man in Phoenix faces a $3,218 bill or a copay, he can manage depends almost entirely on which state he happens to live in and which ambulance company happened to be stationed in his zip code. Geography as financial destiny. There is a deeper structural issue underneath all of this. Emergency medical services in America has never been classified as an essential service in the way that would justify stable public funding. Paramedics earn around $50,000 a year on average, roughly $10,000 less than police officers and $6,000 less than firefighters, despite performing work that is at least as clinically complex. The staffing crisis in emergency medical services is real. The equipment costs are real. The rural coverage gaps are real. None of that gets fixed by capping bills alone. It gets fixed by doing what virtually every other developed country has done, treating emergency medical transport as a public utility, funded through general taxation, available at the point of need without a bill arriving afterward. In the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and Canada, a person having a heart attack does not receive a $3,000 invoice 3 weeks later. The ambulance is considered a basic function of a civilized society, like the road it drives on. The cost is spread across the tax base and distributed invisibly, the way most public infrastructure works. Americans pay for their fire departments whether or not their house ever burns. The idea that the ambulance should work differently has never been seriously challenged at the federal level. America made a different choice, not explicitly, not through a single debate, but through decades of incremental decisions. Medicare fee schedules set too low, emergency medical services excluded from public safety budgets, private capital allowed to fill the gaps, and a federal legislature that, when given a clear opportunity, left the ambulance out of the law. The next time you hear a siren behind you on the highway and pull to the right, you are watching the most expensive ambulance system in the developed world. That truck costs an average of $1,383 per transport before mileage is added. It is staffed by people earning less than many plumbers. It may be owned by a private equity firm that paid $2.4 billion for the right to send you a bill. And if it ever pulls into your driveway, you will not know what it costs until the envelope arrives. The mechanism that makes all of this possible is not a villain in a boardroom. It is a single sentence that was left out of a law in 2021. A carve-out, a footnote, the kind of legislative gap that sounds technical and procedural and completely unimportant, right up until the moment it is the most important sentence in your life.